There is a particular kind of quiet that belongs only to a British Sunday morning in the 1970s. The milkman's float hums somewhere down the street before the rest of the world has stirred. Net curtains shift in upstairs windows. And there, on every driveway from Wolverhampton to Wakefield, from Swindon to Salford, sits the family car, still carrying the mud from Saturday's trip to the market, still smelling faintly of chip paper and damp dog and somebody's grandmother's lavender. These were not simply vehicles. They were the physical shape of ordinary British ambition, paid for in weekly installments, washed on Sunday mornings with a yellow sponge and a bucket of fairy liquid, and driven with a care that spoke of how much they mattered. 10 cars ruled the roads of Britain in the 1970s more than any others, and if you grew up in that decade, at least one of them was part of your story. If any of these takes you back somewhere worth returning to, stay with us, leave a comment, and subscribe, because we have many more chapters of this story still to tell. 10. The Austin Allegro, the car that kept the lights on at Longbridge. When the Austin Allegro arrived in May 1973, the motoring press reached for its most unkind vocabulary almost immediately. That squared quartic steering wheel became a national joke before the paint had time to dry. The rounded, slightly bulbous bodywork, the work of Harris Mann, the same man who would later style the Princess, divided opinion sharply in a decade that was already divided enough. And yet out there in real Britain, on the council estates of Birmingham and the suburban crescents of Leicester, something different was happening. Families who needed a reliable, affordable, front-wheel drive family car were quietly buying Allegros in very significant numbers. By the time production ended in 1982, exactly 642,350 had been built at Longbridge, the overwhelming majority sold right here in Britain. They came with hydrogas suspension that genuinely rode well on broken roads, a useful range of engines from 1.1 to 1.7 litres, and interiors that, if not luxurious, were honest and practical. The Allegro deserved better than the reputation it earned, and the families who depended on it knew that perfectly well. 9. The Ford Cortina Mark III, Britain's most rational obsession. Ford unveiled the Cortina Mark III at the London Motor Show in 1970, and the car that greeted visitors was longer, lower, and considerably more stylish than anyone had anticipated. The American-influenced bodywork turned heads in a way that British family cars rarely managed, and Ford priced it with a precision that left the competition looking overconfident. Between 1970 and 1976, more than 1.1 million Mark III Cortinas were sold in Britain, making it the undisputed best-selling car of that 6-year period. You knew this car. Your father probably drove one in Ermine or Sunset, parked outside a semi-detached house with a net curtain at the front window and a lawnmower in the garage. The Mark III came in engines from 1.3 to 2.0 litres, and the 2000E was, for a brief golden moment, the car that a certain kind of quietly successful Englishman aspired to. Ford understood what British buyers wanted in the 1970s better than almost anyone, and the Cortina Mark III was the proof of that understanding, parked on nearly every street in the country. 8. The Vauxhall Viva HC, the honest choice that never pretended to be more. By 1970, the Vauxhall Viva had already been through 2 generations, and Vauxhall had learned something important from both of them. The HC generation, launched in 1970 with restyled bodywork and a usefully practical range of specifications, asked nothing complicated of its owner and delivered nothing complicated in return. It started on cold mornings. It fit into small garages. It carried families to Skegness and brought them home again. In an era when the roads were full of cars promising things they sometimes failed to deliver, the Viva simply went where it was pointed and kept going. Young couples bought them. Retired gentlemen drove them carefully. Women who had recently passed their test found them forgiving and manageable. The HC Viva ran until 1979, and across that decade it filled driveways and car parks in a way that spoke less of automotive passion and more of the straightforward, decent practicality that most British families actually needed from a car in the 1970s. And then, just as the Viva was quietly doing its dependable best, a car arrived from Coventry that would remind the whole country, and most of Europe, that Britain could still produce something genuinely extraordinary. 7. The Triumph Dolomite Sprint, the car that shocked a continent. There was a moment in the autumn of 1973 when British motoring journalism briefly lost its composure. The Triumph Dolomite Sprint had just been tested, and the numbers coming back from the test track did not seem possible for a car wearing a British Leyland badge and costing less than £1,800. Its 1,998 cubic centimeters engine, developing 127 brake horsepower through the world's first mass-produced 16-valve cylinder head, An engineering achievement so significant it won a Design Council Award, pushed the Sprint to 117 miles per hour and reached 60 miles per hour in 8.4 seconds. Motor Magazine compared it to a BMW 2002 Ti and concluded that the British car held its own with considerable pride. The racing program confirmed what the road tests had suggested. In 1975, Andy Rouse drove a factory-prepared Dolomite Sprint to the outright British Saloon Car Championship title, beating everything that Europe could offer. For the engineers at Canley in Coventry who had believed in this car when very few others had, that championship was everything. The Dolomite Sprint remains the finest proof that when British engineers were given the freedom and the budget to do something extraordinary, they were entirely capable of exactly that. 6. The Morris Marina, the car Britain needed even when it did not quite want it. Perhaps you should not smile too quickly at the Morris Marina. It is easy to do. Jeremy Clarkson dropped a piano on television, and the joke has never quite faded. But the facts tell a more complicated and more human story. The Marina, rushed into production under the British Leyland codename ADO-28, was launched in 1971 as a deliberately simple, deliberately affordable, rear-wheel drive family saloon designed to compete with the Ford Cortina in the fleet market. It shared front suspension components with the Morris Minor, a fact the press never forgot and never forgave. And yet across its 9-year production life, more than 807,000 Marinas were sold in Britain alone. In 1973, it was Britain's second best-selling car, outsold only by the Cortina. Fleet buyers loved its simplicity. Working families trusted its straightforwardness. And if you are watching this and your family owned one, you are absolutely not alone, because the numbers make that a near certainty. The Marina won by being the car that was available, affordable, and dependable enough. And in a decade of strikes, power cuts, and economic anxiety, that was sometimes exactly what the country needed. 5. The Rover P6, the thinking driver's companion through difficult times. If you are watching this and you remember a Rover P6 sitting on a neighbor's drive, you will probably remember who drove it. The teacher with the leather patches on his jacket. The local solicitor. The GP who made house calls in the rain without complaint. The Rover 2000, launched in 1963 and developed continuously until 1977, was in production for the entire decade, and it carried, throughout those years, an almost quiet authority. It had won European Car of the Year in 1964, recognized by the international jury as one of the very first British cars ever to receive that honor, and its Dion rear suspension and sophisticated base unit construction remained genuinely advanced long after rivals had come and gone. The V8-powered 3500 version, using the lightweight aluminium engine that Rover had acquired from BIC in 1965, offered genuine performance wrapped in an interior of leather and walnut that felt entirely right for the kind of driver who read quality newspapers and took his holidays in the Scottish Highlands. In a decade when British manufacturing was often an embarrassment, the Rover P6 was quietly, stubbornly magnificent. 4. The Hillman Avenger, Chrysler's quietly accomplished British surprise. By 1970, when the Hillman Avenger arrived with its distinctive L-shaped rear taillights, the Roots Group had become part of Chrysler, and the future of British-badged family cars from Coventry was not entirely clear. But the Avenger itself was a genuinely accomplished piece of work. A conventional, rear-wheel drive family saloon with better handling than the Marina, a comfortable ride, and a range of engines and trim levels that gave buyers real choices. The estate version was particularly well loved by young families who needed to move house contents, holiday luggage, and a large dog simultaneously, and who had discovered that the estate car was perhaps the most useful vehicle Britain had yet produced. In GT trim, the Avenger offered a genuine sporting edge that surprised those who expected nothing beyond sensible transport. Chrysler sold the Avenger in significant numbers throughout the decade, and those who owned one tended to remember it with uncomplicated affection. A car that did what it promised, day after day, without drama or difficulty. In the 1970s, that was not a small achievement. 3. The Jaguar XJ6, the quiet proof that Britain could still do it. Not every story from 1970s Britain is a story of compromise and managed expectations. The Jaguar XJ6 is a different kind of story entirely. Launched in September 1968 at the Paris Motor Show, it was named Car of the Year by the International Motoring Press, and Autocar wrote that Jaguar should simply double the price and call it the best car in the world, because dynamically it had no equal regardless of cost. Through the 1970s, in Series 2 form from 1973 onwards, the XJ6 remained the benchmark against which every luxury saloon in Europe measured itself. Its ride quality was the smoothest of any production car on Earth. Its handling, developed by Chief Engineer Bob Knight to combine the comfort of a Rolls-Royce with the precision of a sports car, astonished every journalist who drove it. And the V12 version offered a wave of silent, seamless power that had to be experienced to be believed. Sir William Lyons had created something almost impossibly good for the money. In a decade when Britain's industrial reputation was suffering badly, the Jaguar XJ6 sat in driveways from Edinburgh to Exeter and reminded everyone, quietly, without fuss, in the Jaguar way, that when this country got things right, nobody in the world did them better. 2. The Mini, still running, still winning, still refusing to grow up. By 1970, the Mini was 11 years old and had already sold in the millions, and there was absolutely no sign that it intended to slow down. Alec Isagonis had created something so fundamentally correct in 1959. The transverse engine, the front-wheel drive, the 10-inch wheels, the extraordinary space efficiency, that no amount of corporate pressure or industrial difficulty at British Leyland could diminish what the car was. Through the 1970s, it remained part of the fabric of British daily life in a way that went beyond mere transport. Young women drove Minis through city centres. Students drove them to and from university. Mechanics drove them to work. Racing drivers who knew precisely what a car was capable of spoke of the Mini with a respect that genuine engineering earns and never needs to explain. Special editions kept it feeling current, and the Clubman variants offered a slightly more contemporary face to buyers who wanted something familiar but freshly presented. By the end of the decade, nearly 5 million Minis had been built across the car's lifetime. It was not simply still alive. It was still, quietly, irreplaceable. 1. The Ford Escort Mark II, the car that understood Britain better than anyone. The Ford Escort Mark II arrived in 1975 and it became the most registered new car in Britain in 1976, a fact recorded by the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. It was everywhere, on council estates and country lanes, outside factories and outside schools. In 1.1 and 1.3-litre form, it was the first car young couples bought when they married. In 1.6 sport form, it was the car that a young man chose when he wanted something that felt alive beneath him without costing more than he earned. And in RS 1800 form, homologated for rallying, built in small numbers at the Boreham factory in Essex, it was one of the most formidable competition cars that Britain had ever produced. Roger Clark won the 1976 RAC Rally outright in a Mark II RS 1800, and the Escort's rally victories in those years became part of the national conversation in a way that motorsport rarely managed. But it was the ordinary ones, the ones with the vinyl seats and the slightly stiff gear change and the heater that worked well enough on a February morning, that wrote the real story. The Ford Escort Mark II did not rule British roads in the 1970s because it was perfect. It ruled them because it understood, with complete and quiet precision, exactly what ordinary British people needed from a car. And that is where these roads lead us. Back to a Britain measured out in petrol stops and seaside trips and Sunday morning bucket and sponge rituals. A Britain where what sat on your driveway said something true about who you were and what you had worked for. From the Allegro's stoic practicality to the Escort's democratic brilliance, from the Jaguar's quiet magnificence to the Mini's enduring refusal to be replaced, these 10 cars carry an entire decade within them. They carry the school runs and the works outings and the first nervous drives on a Saturday morning with a newly issued license. If any of these cars brought back a memory today, a particular smell, a particular road, a particular person beside you in the passenger seat, we would love to hear it. Tell us in the comments which one meant the most to you, or which one your family drove. Give this video a like if it took you somewhere you were glad to visit again, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next chapter of this shared British story.